Hello everybody, welcome back to more Art of War, Hell Hath No Fury. Feels like a million years since I've done this. It's been about a week or so. I wanted to take a little bit of time for myself. I was feeling really run down and wasn't in a great mental headspace, but I'm feeling better, getting there. So I want to get back to reading this book. So catch up, what has been happening? Well, the head of the demon the headless body of the demon that Martha had killed turned up again on the top of Blackthorn Hill. Olivia had taken it upon herself to investigate the death of the witch that gave William Ford her magic, and Martha went along to assist while they went and looked at her house. Unfortunately, the witch was still there, at least her spirit, and she was very territorial and she attacked them using wraiths, and Parker got hurt. And while they were getting him help, somebody else showed up, scared the crap out of them, which led to Martha having a debriefing with Stefan, who seems to be struggling with just everything at the moment in the whole situation. But that prompted Martha to want to go back to Rebecca Patterson's house and try again with the spirit and get some better results, which she seemingly did. So we rejoin the story as she's finally got home after what has been an eventful day, and check up on that old friend of hers who went and got himself hurt. Silly boy. And see where we go from there. So we are up to chapter 14. Chapter 14. Finally arriving back at the place that had become her home away from home, Martha remained huddled against Stefan's chest a little longer than she normally would. The emotions that she'd been embracing not yet leaving her, even though she'd fixed her barriers back into place. The journey across the park was a short one, but she hadn't wanted to walk through it despite feeling on such a high. Not that night. It would have felt like tempting fate. Stefan didn't encourage her to let go either, holding her to him for as long as she was content to be there. His own emotions seemed to have softened in response to hers, the way that the evening had progressed seeming to give him something positive to bolster them amid so much peril. Martha had been surprised by how well he had slotted in with how she intended to operate inside of the border, all things considered. There was always going to be a certain awkwardness between them, given the shift in their professional dynamic. Which of them was now running the show? But it was like nothing had changed, other than their roles being switched. She could very easily see that should the need arise, it'd be fitting to have him at her back, keeping her safe while she engaged the more dangerous occult elements in Marytown. With Parker looking at potential downtime, there could be a need for it, and she was certain that Peter Maxwell would be struck giddy by the idea of having the leader of the Sons of Azazel follow her into Empire. He'd already been engaging in a meticulous charm offensive to secure Martha as a full-time employee. Nephilim warriors were a feather for his bow. Shame it was never going to happen. Stefan had responsibilities beyond the border and didn't tend to enjoy working alongside humans. Aside from the one notable exception to the rule, of course, he had taken a human-born Nephilim under his wing. Knowing she couldn't stay standing outside forever, Martha drew herself out of the embrace. Rather than immediately let her go, Stefan took her by the hand, as if he wasn't quite ready to part ways, delaying the inevitable that they knew was going to have to happen. He was never going to follow her inside. Their home was many miles away, their shared residence on the Mount. Michael Parker's apartment was way beyond his jurisdiction. Therefore, this was where they parted ways, for now. Stefan nodded, acknowledging this, softly spoke her name. Martha didn't know what she was expecting to say, a lot of unlikely possibilities running rampant through her mind. Though it seemed to be a day for such things, she paid them no reasonable heed. Transpired such caution was wise. Adopting his usual brusque tone, he offered, "If you need assistance when you've apprehended a suspected servant of Mammon, don't hesitate to ask for it. There are things we can do which can expedite matters, help move things forward. You still have those options." Nodding, she attested. "I know. And thank you, Stefan. I shall leave you, let you get some rest. Bear in mind all that we discussed at camp. Should you leave this building, I want to know about it, from you, so that provisions can be made to ensure your safety." Conceding to the reasonable demand, she said, "Of course." His thumb brushed gently along the back of the hand that he'd healed, as if he was still struggling to let the bad moments of the day go, even though the majority of them had now been repaired. Martha understood the sentiment. She felt it herself. It had been one hell of a day, and it had certainly taken a toll. Eventually, he said, "We shall speak in the morning." Martha nodded. "Good night, Stefan." Finally, he put aside his protectiveness, did his duty, and he let her go. Martha walked down the path to the front door of Parker's building, and she didn't look back. She didn't want to turn around, only to find that Stefan was gone, having vanished as if he hadn't just been standing there, holding her a lot closer than he had done in years. That evening, it felt like it would have been a hard thing to take, and so she didn't dare risk it. Once safely inside the building, she climbed up the concrete staircase to the second floor, the location of the apartment that Parker owned, her new home, or at least her Marytown home. Drawing in an exhausted breath, she unlocked the front door. The whole place was ominously quiet as she slipped inside, fearing the worst of greetings to be waiting for her, another horror to end the day. She'd already been reminded far too brutally that the pact didn't make it impossible for demons to enter Marytown and cause wanton murder or destruction, to destroy an innocent person's life. If they were careful, it wouldn't even be impossible to bypass the Nephilim guards patrolling the border now. Stefan's brothers were the best warriors of the Mount. His scouts were exceptional, but they were fallible. After what Stefan had told her about the demon of wrath, it was far too easy to imagine that the brute of a male she'd encountered would be able to enact such a gruesome feat. Rally the sons of Azazel to the border when he was already inside of the town. Sneak into the female Nephilim's home and resign her human friends to the most awful of fates. In, murder, gone. It felt like a challenge that a monster made of wrath would relish. One that set Martha on edge, ready to plummet back down to earth. Hanging a jacket in the kitchenette entrance hall and leaving the ledger on the breakfast bar, she couldn't find any immediate trace of the blonde pagan that her new housemate used to be married to, but she easily located Parker, seated inside of his ensuite bathroom, alive if not well. It sounded like he was taking a shower, the cadence of fast running water coming from behind the door. Taking advantage of what had become their unspoken signal that they didn't mind having company, his open bedroom door, she waited, wanting to check in with him before she bathed and called it a night. She wanted to make sure that he was okay and find out what happened to Olivia, tell him about the truce with Rebecca Patterson, have a moment of human interaction while they could. Aside from the bed, which was big enough to share company with, he felt so inclined. Dressed in neutral cream bedding, Parker's comfortable yet functional bedroom had a double set of wardrobes, an entertainment unit that had a decent-sized television set, and a large dresser. On the surface of the chest of drawers, there was a wide selection of personal items, including photographs of people he loved, mostly his family. His late parents and his older sister Sally featured in a lot of them. There were pictures of them from years ago as well, snapshots of Sally with what Martha assumed to be her husband and two young sons. A couple of the remaining photographs featured Olivia, displaying the prominent role that she'd played in Parker's life, including one from their wedding day. A moment that captured how in love they were. And then there was one image that Martha initially had been surprised to have seen still up there, right in the middle of the lot, a wide-framed photograph in which she appeared. Taken on the night of his 18th birthday, it featured a small group of happy people, smiling wildly because that's what you did when it was a party and someone pointed a camera in your direction. A handsome and youthful-looking Parker had his arm around his girlfriend, drawing her in close to his side, a place that she seemed to fit perfectly. Her hand was resting on his chest, and he was kissing the side of her head, eyes sealed, happiness spread over his face, matched in the eyes of the girl he loved. Seeing it made Martha feel a strange mixture of fondness and regret. A sorrowful reality of the image was that it was probably the last time they'd posed for a photograph together, the last celebration before life had taken its nasty turn and torn them from each other. By the time that Martha's 18th birthday had rolled around later that same year, she'd been gone, taken by an enemy that they hadn't known of. In the years that followed, Parker had not only lost the girl that he dedicated his formative years to, but also his beloved, wonderful parents. Unlike Martha, though, there was no chance of them ever coming home. It was hard not to feel the loss, to understand everything their oldest friend had been through in the time since that photograph had been taken. Martha had such fond memories of his parents, Karen and Frank, and she'd been genuinely moved to learn that they'd both passed away. Sitting down to rest on the edge of Parker's bed, Martha thought that it was a wonder that her childhood sweetheart could be as compassionate and kind as he still was. Lesser people would have turned bitter, living the hand that he'd been dealt. And Olivia had been sadly accurate when she'd attributed his overprotective nature to the fact that he'd lost so much. But he still had a big and generous heart, a quality that didn't seem to have waned over the years. He hadn't been obligated to offer Martha a safe place within Marytown to rest her head and feel at home. There'd been no expected requirement. He owed her absolutely nothing. but the wonderful influences of his parents seemed to have stayed with him, and like when they were teenagers, he'd given her the sanctuary she desperately craved. Martha felt so lucky to have him back in her life. She would never take it for granted, not even when he acted like a bloody idiot and got himself hurt. Eventually coming out of the bathroom wearing nothing but a pair of soft-looking grey sweatpants, Parker's injuries were starkly visible. Focused mainly on the left side, his midsection and an athletically toned upper body were covered in a mass of deep and angry reddish-purple bruises. It was a wonder that his ribs had only been battered and not broken. Martha must have looked as horrified as she felt, because he forsook any sort of greeting to quickly reassure her. It looks a hell of a lot worse than it feels. Then how does it feel? Because it looks excruciating. Tully gave me some painkillers and anti-inflammatories, he said. They're helping. Showering brought out some of the bruising, but the hot water released some of the stiffness. I can move around easier than before. I think you need to stop moving around altogether. That's the plan, he grumbled, slowly navigating his way to the other side of the bed, closest to the door where he tended to sleep. Martha kept out of his way as best she could, eyes fixed on the range of motion to try and assess how brave a face he was putting on it. Rather like how Stefan had looked over her, she imagined. Only Michael Parker was a lot more stubborn than she'd ever become. A stubborn man who'd really never learned how to stay down when he was beaten. He didn't need to tough it out around her. Acknowledging the large bandage that was proficiently wrapped around his left shoulder and upper arm down to the elbow, she questioned, "Did the good doctor also give you permission to get that thing soaking wet?" He shrugged mulishly, winced slightly. "Did the best I could. Should have gotten Olivia to help you, or waited for me." "Oh yeah?" he chuckled smugly. "How would that have worked?" Awkwardly blushing, Martha again realised that she simply couldn't answer that blithe question, and she didn't want to think about what her alternative plan might have required of her. Standing up, she began to pull the covers back to help Parker get into bed, deflecting from her social inadequacies. When did she leave? When we debriefed Maxwell, he decided that he wanted to come and pick her up, take her home with him. She was shaken, but doing okay. He was worried about her, and by that point she just wanted to call it a night. Nodding, Martha said. "It's understandable." "Amanda's tried calling you," Parker said. "Did you get hold of her?" "She did," Martha sighed heavily. "No, I haven't checked my phone." As he carefully eased his bruised body onto the mattress, Parker laughed, continuing to river, saying, "Those things work a lot better if you don't put them on silent and ignore them, don't you?" "I hate ringtones," she pouted. "They're obnoxious." "That's why you having a phone is utterly pointless." "You might be right." "Seriously though, are you doing okay after what happened today?" "Yeah," Martha tried her best to reassure him. "All in a day's work." "Well, forgive me if I choose to not accept that squaring up to that demonic bastard is what your regular Nephilim assignments are like." "No, you're right," Martha admitted reluctantly. "That was not normal, but it was my duty and the whole reason I've been allowed to remain here. When it comes to demons, keeping people safe requires that little bit extra." Allowing her psychic barriers to fall back a little, Martha permitted herself to catch a glimpse of the thing that she hoped would keep them safe from a repeated performance of what had happened outside the clinic. Barrier and protection spells. Magic that was quite different to the incantation that kept the Nephilim safe, the Nephilim camp hidden, because they were of human origin, but no less impressive to Martha, who couldn't help but find it wondrous to feel and witness the runes etched into the walls of Parker's lovely home. Olivia was such a talented lady. The effort and energy she put into keeping her former husband safe was equally remarkable and heart-wrenching in its intricacy and its beauty. Golden runes and shimmering magic. It was hard to imagine that anything would be able to get through the powerful spells designed to save Parker's life in an emergency. He'd be safe at home, always. Even if it might not offer Martha the same level of protection, nothing would ever harm him inside of these walls. That was all that mattered. "Martha?" Shaking her head, she admonished herself. "Sorry, what did you say?" Tucked up nice and safe in the comfort of his bed, a small stack of pillows bunched up behind his back as a prop, Parker softly smiled and repeated, "I asked what happened at your debriefing. If you can tell me." Appreciating that he understood that some information might be confidential, for Nephilim ears only, Martha veered on the side of caution in responding. She didn't like the idea of withholding anything from Parker, but she didn't want to burden him with having more to fear after the day they'd endured. Plus, there was already a little bit of checkered history between him and Stefan regarding information that Parker might have overheard, stuff that then found its way to another person's influential ears. Martha trusted Parker implicitly, but she had to be careful. Not everything Stefan shared with her should become common knowledge. Being tactful, she said, He's identified the demon that we encountered and is prepared to act accordingly about the threat. Of course, Parker pushed for more. What does that mean? It means that for now, the Nephilim will be taking extra steps to ensure that we and the border of Marytown are as safe as it can be. Furrowing his brow into what felt like a half-serious expression of fear, he gazed around the room and inquired, "Not gardeners right now, are they?" "No, they're not in here," Martha laughed softly. "But there'll be someone stationed outside watching us overnight. Most likely Isaac." "You mean the one that hit me in the face with my own shotgun?" "That wasn't personal," Martha chided. Felt pretty damn personal," Parker grumbled, but he let it go. Smart man. "It's probably best not to hold a grudge against the Nephilim whose job it would be to save you from a demon itching to tear you to shreds. Isaac North was not Parker's enemy in the slightest. He had much bigger prey to hunt." Sitting back down on the edge of the bed, being careful not to make Parker have to move for her, Martha found herself telling him, "Stefan thinks it's the same demon that returned the body that they found in the hills." His reply was a simple, low-hanging curse. Trying to reassure him, or perhaps herself, she stated, "It's scare tactics. Sending that body back shows that my actions here are being watched. That demon showing his face, revealing his threat, trying to get inside of my head, make me back off, leave town maybe. They've lost a lot of ground here, and they should be scared. I found an incredible lead tonight, Parker. One that will help us track down and identify people in league with them, that worship them." Looking surprised, he asked, "You did?" "Rebecca Patterson gave me a ledger, a book of names that..." Interrupting her, he said, "Wait, you went back to their house?" Frowning, Martha noticed. "You knew I was going to." He sounded dumbfounded. "Yeah, but on your own?" "Martha." As if he couldn't verbalise what he wanted to say, he sealed his lips and shook his head, annoyed with her. As the potential cost of upsetting the undead witch was visually emblazoned across his battered body, and he couldn't stand the thought of her being in danger, ending up the same way. He sealed his eyes, drew in a few breaths, made Martha wonder if he was trying to summon the strength or the courage not to follow through on his desire to chastise her. Or maybe he was simply counting down from 10. A restraint that was surprising. Perhaps he was learning some tact. "I didn't go back there alone," she clarified. "Stefan was with me." Didn't help. Parker huffed and puffed. Of course he was. Which made Martha have to fight not to roll her eyes. While she knew that Parker reluctantly felt gratitude towards Stefan for what he'd done for her, she also knew that he blamed the Nephilim warrior for her not returning to Marytown about as much as he did the monsters who abducted her in the first place. It wasn't a fair comparison to make, by any stretch, but personal feelings clouded Parker's judgment as much as they made Stefan want to keep as far away from her childhood sweetheart as he possibly could. They'd probably never be friends, which was sad, if understandable. At best, they might learn how to tolerate each other. Martha wasn't selfish enough to start demanding more. "Today was a bad day," she said, hoping that her cadence could help Parker feel less grumpy. "It was hard and scary, even for me. But emotions have a way of making it feel harder. I know that Stefan cares, worries about what happens to me." She did. Had felt it throughout all of their interactions that evening. But I also respect his ability to put it aside and do his duty. It's not about the bond you share with somebody, it's about doing what's right. And that's what I do. My duty is a Nephilim, as the Nephilim Marytown has been entrusted to. No matter what or who chooses to stand in my way. Softly, Parker replied. "Fair enough. It was worth it," she told him. "What I got was worth it. Damn well better be." The semi-joke made her impulsively smile, a familiar and comforting warmth spreading over her that seemed to only increase when Parker reached down and took her healed hand with the hand from his uninjured arm. It was a lovely, simple act of physical contact which hinted at the level of understanding and trust between them, the deepness of their own bond. While not metaphysical in any possible sense, it still meant so much. For a while, neither of them talked. They simply sat there together. If he had any thoughts about the sudden recovery of her physical injuries, which Martha suspected he might, given how he glanced down at the back of her hand, he refrained from commenting on it, to ask her how, when. If the earlier events at Rebecca Patterson's house had given Martha any fresh insights into how her oldest friend coped emotionally and mentally with the changes that had happened since they were teenagers, it was that he still had a way to go. In his role at Empire, he was the non-metaphysical backup, the muscle, the enforcer. He'd done what he considered to be his duty that afternoon, but it was laden with emotional baggage, because it had been Olivia who was in danger, and he was still struggling to understand, if not accept, that the girl he'd spent so many of his youthful years defending no longer had the same physical need of him, and also could pull him from the fire and shake off the scorch marks with an otherworldly amount of speed and ease. Martha didn't feel the need to assure him that she was only doing so well because she'd required the celestial aid of Stefan's personal power on that particular day. Parker was already feeling like he was coming up short, laying there injured while the favoured son of Azazel took over, succeeding in being her potential backup where he had failed. It was unfair to give him more ammunition to shoot himself in the ego with. He didn't deserve that. And so the female Nephilim sat there with him, enjoying the silence. After a while, it was Parker who spoke, his voice contented, almost sleepy, as he made a simple request. "Tell me more things about you." "You already know a lot about me," she said. "More than most people do." He looked somewhat sad as he added, "Not anymore." Though it was her least favourite subject, Martha acquiesced to his request, which still felt as weird as it was bittersweet. Michael Parker knew her better than most people ever had or would. He knew all of the things that she'd done when they were younger. He intimately knew many of her fears and almost all of her sadness. He understood why she'd grown up to be the person that she'd become because he'd witnessed her foundations. But there were now parts of her life that he didn't know, things that he'd never been a part of. Martha knew how much he hated that, but there'd been a decade, filled with life experiences that they had not yet shared. It was strange to reconcile how somebody that knew her so well in a lot of ways could also at times feel like they'd become a stranger. Gazing across the room at his collection of photographs, she fell upon an idea, then inquired, "Have I told you yet that I've got brothers?" Parker's eyes opened in surprise. "You have brothers?" "Yeah, 3 of them," she nodded. "Gadriel's sons." He shook his head in bewilderment. "What are their names?" "Sean, Jacob and Matthias." "Are they all older than you?" Martha nodded, by some margin. Are they like you?" He seemed to be trying to find the right word in the end. Went with probably the most endearingly awful. "Are they human?" "All Nephilim are part human, Parker," she explained, for what might have been the second or maybe third time. "Our birth mothers are mortal women. Even Stefan's mother was mortal, a human woman. But no, my stepbrothers are not like me. I'm what they call human-born, which means I was born and raised down here in the mortal realm. They were born and raised on the mount. That makes them more Nephilim. They have abilities that I do not and will never be able to possess, and they're more otherworldly than I'll ever become. Sorry, I didn't mean to, Martha turned her face back towards him. She said, "I know. It's not your fault that human-born has the word human in it rather than mortal. When I first arrived at the Mount, I thought that it was a way for them to perhaps deliberately make me feel inferior. It's not really. Having strong ties to the mortal realm does make me different. Some might say lesser. But it's a simple biological fact. I'm not as Nephilim as they are." Kindly, Parker attested. I think you're plenty Nephilim enough. You knew me before. It's different for you. And you were remarkable back then," he pointed out, as if he were not willing to let her make herself feel inferior. "So what's the difference?" "Nothing," she supposed. The way that a mortal viewed her compared to those of the Mount was never going to match up. To Parker, she was in many ways the same strange girl that he'd once fallen in love with, just with some additional and at times scary otherworldly enhancements. But to a Nephilim, like the sons of Azazel, she was one of their own, but had not been afforded the same privileged start in life, which made her not as strong, not as fast, not quite as immortal. To them she was less, even if she was technically the same. The two ideologies were never going to fully understand each other, which made Martha wonder how she, the one who bridged the reality of both, was ever supposed to come to terms with who or what she seemingly was. Picking up on her discomfort, Parker gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, before deliberately marvelling. 4 kids, huh? Sounds like Gadriel's had his work cut out for him, even before he met you. Hardly, Martha scoffed. It might seem like a lot by our standards, but amongst the Watchers he's actually the least prolific breeder, by a large margin. Stefan's father Azazel, for comparison, must have spawned at least 100 sons since I've been around, and that's not counting the ones he had before, those I've never met. Like any military might, The sons of Azazel are stationed all over the mortal realm, fighting the demons within the designated regions, which are normally the same places that their mothers were born, to give them an advantage. I guess the number must be in the thousands, but I couldn't even possibly estimate it. Only that they're all Stefan's brothers. Well, half-brothers, Martha definitely felt a need to add. Not all of the same biological mother, obviously. Parker nodded slowly, clearly overwhelmed. Obviously. An awkward silence fell between them. An awkward silence fell between Martha and her oldest mortal friend, the scale of the numbers that made up the sons of Azazel's warrior force difficult to fathom. Martha understood the bewilderment, had felt it herself when she'd once asked Stefan about his otherworldly family. The sons of Azazel was not just an intimidating title. It was literally who they all were, the sons of that one male. Steering the conversation back to her kin, she said, "My oldest stepbrother Sean is like a carbon copy of Gadriel, only with long curly hair, and he wears glasses. He's a diplomat who resides on the Mount and handles all of our father's affairs, while Jacob, the second oldest, takes care of business out here on the mortal realm, living out of a suitcase, staying in nice hotels rather than any of the warrior camps or facilities that might be nearby. He does diplomacy rather differently than how it's done on the Mount. He's rather good at what he does." Inevitably, Parker asked, "And what is it that he does?" "He's a spy." "Oh," her male companion laughed at her bluntness. "Jacob's a good male," Martha said. "A bit of a handful by the standards set by those on the Mount, but he's always gone out of his way to make me feel a part of his life. He came home specifically to meet me when I first arrived there, and he always seems to find the time to see me around my birthday." "He sounds like a good brother," Martha smiled fondly. "He is." "What about the other two?" "Sean and I have a cordial relationship. He tolerates me, but I think that he sees me as immature because he's so much older, and he kind of resents that I chose to follow my path instead of Gadriel's." "Curious," Parker asked. "How much older is he?" "Gosh," she tried to think, to put it into words. "I'm not sure, to be honest. I know that his mother, like most of the Watcher's first partners, was some sort of royalty in one of those ancient European civilizations we learned about at school, but I couldn't honestly tell you which one. Sean's very old, one of the oldest Nephilim, a firstborn." That bewildered expression once again crossed Parker's handsome face, and even though Martha was fairly certain she witnessed him mentally try and process what that might imply about her own longevity, he followed it up by astutely noting, "You've barely said anything about your third brother." "Matthias is," Martha found herself frowning, "exactly who he is." Parker smiled, inferring, "And that's all you have to say?" "We don't get along." "You don't seem to get along with your father either." "Actually, my biological father and I have a satisfactory relationship." He laughed openly at the equivocation, to which Martha shrugged, tried to explain. "When Stefan took me to meet Gadriel for the first time, I was told the truth about who I was, why the demons targeted me in Marytown. Everything that had been kept a secret from me. I think he believed that I should be thankful for that, recalling the rush of emotions as if she'd only just felt them an hour earlier," Martha added. "I was so angry. Though he seemed genuine enough in his desire to accept me, I wanted nothing to do with him. I mean, I knew that biologically he and my mother met. They fell in love, and somewhere in the middle of their courtship, I happened. I'd ruined it all, being a girl," she silently seethed. "But I never wanted a father, not one that hated me for something I couldn't control, nor one who decided that he only wanted me because it was no longer politically inconvenient for him to acknowledge me. Still not really fond of the idea. We get along, for appearance's sake." Parker nodded as if he understood, which she knew he did. The concept of family had always meant more to Martha than genetics. It was about being there when the other person needed you to be there the most. It was about sharing an unbreakable bond. It was about love that was unconditional and without shame or bitterness. She'd always considered Michael Parker to be her family. She had yet to embrace Gadriel, Watcher of Grace, as kin. Her childhood friend surprised her once more, keenly deducing, "You're closer to Stefan's father. What did you say his name was? Azazel?" To which Martha nodded. "Yes, I suppose I am." "Is that because of your relationship with his son?" "Sort of," she said, pleased that he seemed to want to hear about the other relationships that she'd formed in the years that they'd been apart. Trying to be as stoic as possible, she admitted, "You were right about the role that Stefan played in what happened to me. He saved me from the demons that abducted me. No, wait. He'd hate me telling it like that. I saved myself. He simply found me and got me out of there, took me to the mountain, helped me recover, gave me a home. Eventually he trained me to become a warrior and took me under his wing with the other sons of Azazel. But that's only a condensed version of the story. There's a lot more to it than that. Sighing in a way that felt resigned, Parker said, I guessed as much. Still not what you think it is. Martha shook her head, gave up on trying to justify a relationship with Stefan to her old love. It was pointless. He'd made it clear that he was never going to believe the protestations. Instead, she told him, Stefan was there in the park the day that I was taken. He'd been sent to find me, to keep me safe and maybe take me to Gadriel. I'm not sure what his exact orders were. He never told me. But he was there. He'd been sent for me, only he wasn't quick enough. She stopped, again rephrased what she was saying. No. That isn't exactly true either. He found me before they did, but I was afraid. I hesitated. And that was enough, because they didn't. It took Parker a long while to respond to that, which was logical. It was a difficult thing for them to be talking about, let alone for him to be confronted with again. Martha thought that he might not have been ready to hear the whole story. But then he asked her something which made her heart ache. Is that why you had a bag packed? She shook her head firmly. No. Sounding sceptically pressed. You weren't running away. Not from Marytown, she said. And not because of Stefan. Or with him, if that's what you thought. I'd already packed before I left my family's home and entered the park. All of what followed happened at once, so fast I barely knew what was going on. It was like one moment I was walking, leaving my parents' house, and then, like I said, Stefan was there before they found me. He spoke to me, tried to assure me that I was going to be safe and that I could go with him and it would be okay, but it didn't matter. They still took me, because I hesitated. They found me, found us. Martha could see Parker processing the information, a deep furrowing of his brow, and while she didn't want to overwhelm him, she kept going, because she started and was afraid that if she stopped now, she'd never give him the clarity that he deserved, those unanswered questions. It took a long time, such a long time, but he found me in the end. The sons assaulted the place that I was being held, and he gave me the distraction that I needed to free myself from my bonds and kill the monsters who held me. By the time that Stefan found me, She swallowed, sealed her own eyes. I was barely able to understand what was happening, what I'd done. But I recognised him. I knew him. That time I didn't hesitate. I went with him, and I was finally free. It was you, Parker asked her, sounding surprised, yet also devastated by what she told him. You killed them, not Stefan. Yes, Martha confessed, hanging her head. I killed my captors. All of them. He sounded more proud than she felt. He sounded more proud than she still felt, as he declared, Good. Not knowing what to say to that, Martha carried on. Stefan took me to the mount so that I could recover. She swallowed. I was in a really bad way. But he stayed with me the whole time, and at a great cost to himself, he made sure that I survived. Then when I finally woke up, he was there. He stayed with me, continued to protect me. He knew that even on the mount it would be overwhelming. I was hurt, so badly hurt, and I didn't know how to trust anybody, she softly confessed. Stefan was the only one that I allowed to get near me. Though she paused for a long moment, giving him an opening, Parker remained in silence. Martha wasn't sure what he was thinking or feeling, but she didn't risk empathically reaching out, was struggling to keep it together herself. Referring back to his initial question, she said, Not long after I first met Gadriel, Stefan also introduced me to his father. Azazel is everything you'd expect the father of the Nephilim warriors to be. The first time we met, I was so scared of him. But he was kind, understanding. He welcomed me, didn't expect anything from me. Yet he spoke a language that I understood, that I started to feel growing within me. He told me that I could find purpose in what had happened to me. How I could turn what had been something terrible and life-destroying into something I could control. Take something positive from it. Give me a reason to fight. Smiling, she felt the same rush of renewed purpose she'd felt back then. For the first time since I woke up, I saw a way back out of the darkness that had consumed me. I believed, and I took my place at Stefan's side. Gazing down at her hands, still interlocked with Parker's resting on top of the duvet cover that separated them, she concluded, So yes, I'm closer to Azazel. He's always shown me kinship, though I'm not of his blood. and he put me on the path that eventually led me back here. Parker's voice seemed to be a little hoarse as he declared, I'm glad. I know, Martha confessed. So am I. Softly, he added, there was a time when I knew everything there was to know about you. Now you're a heavenly warrior with 1,004 brothers and kick demons in their evil asses for a living. That's a lot to take. Emphasizing, she again said, I know it is. Martha, still staring down at their entwined hands, she said, yeah. Come here and let me cuddle you, he requested, making it clear by his tone that if she didn't want to, she could say no. The thing was, she did want to, more than she knew what to do with. And so, she said, I probably shouldn't risk hurting you. You won't. Forlornly, she laughed. You don't know that. I don't care. Which seemed like a proportionate part of the problem. Parker had already proven once that day that when it came to a choice between following his emotions and safeguarding his physical well-being, he was driven by what was in his heart rather than his head. Even if it got him hurt, even if the fallout was as confusing as it ended up being painful. Martha knew that she ought to be the smarter woman and leave, let him get his rest, let him recover. But Parker's heart had inflicted more wounds on him than any ancient wraith could ever impose, grievances that he never seemed to have been able to heal from, injuries that Martha herself also carried. Something needed to give. The suffering had gone on for long enough. Taking what felt like a massive step for their interpersonal well-being, she released his hand. But she didn't leave. Instead, she leant down and unlaced her boots, carefully pulling off the left one, half expecting it to still be sore and swollen, then the right. She removed her socks and found her feet. Moving away from the edge of the bed, she kept her back to Parker and began to undress, mostly because she didn't want to see anything in his eyes that might frighten her, or make her feel self-conscious about what was all over her body, her many scars. Even though he'd already seen the worst of them during the heated confrontation the night she returned to town, when she'd angrily shown him the brutal reality of what had happened to her. She tried to take Stefan's earlier statement about how they were not something to be ashamed of to heart, but this was different. It was a choice. It was her choice. Rational or not, it was a choice that she needed to make. She couldn't be afraid of what lay underneath her carefully constructed surface. She needed to be able to move forward, no matter how difficult that was. Quickly and efficiently, so as not to overthink it, she stripped down to her underwear, kind of wishing that she'd taken the time to shower while she'd been waiting, and left her clothes on a neat pile at the end of Parker's bed, which she crawled onto, still not daring to look in his direction, pulling back the duvet and finding herself a place next to him on his less injured side. She lay down, propping her back upon the stack of pillows. They were now shoulder to shoulder, side to side. She covered up her semi-nudity with the duvet and laid there. Parker didn't immediately reach to embrace her, to give her that hug that he'd requested. Martha appreciated the restraint. She needed time, space, a moment to acclimatise, to settle in. It had been a long time since she'd been alone on a bed with a man, let alone this man. The only man she'd ever actually been alone on a bed with. That only feel relevant in so much that it made her feel like she could take this step. It's hard to imagine it could have been anybody else. Still, it had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to get close to another person, to any other person. She needed a moment to take her time, which Parker gave to her, waiting ever so patiently. When she eventually dared to turn his face, he smiled, many different and powerful emotions flowing through the deep pools of his eyes. With a contented sigh, he said, "Not gonna lie, that's not what I was expecting. But, damn, Martha, I missed you," she confessed. "I've missed you too." "You really here?" He shook his head as if he still couldn't quite believe what was happening. "I mean, I know you've been back for weeks and I've seen you every day, but you're here, my Martha, with me." Martha allowed herself to laugh at that, though she wasn't sure that she could still consider herself to be his Martha. Gazing into those awe-filled eyes that she used to know so well, she decided it wasn't her place to decide such a thing. It didn't matter. Parker was right there, and so was she, and somehow they'd survived the awful day that they'd endured, back together, and that was something special. Reassuring herself to carry on being brave and bold, she took the initiative and reenacted a gesture that he had guided her to when they'd been in the clinic, reaching over with a hand and tentatively caressing the side of his face. The day-old stubble sprouting through his cheeks was rough beneath her fingertips. Parker sighed, carefully shifting over to his uninjured side, now facing her, which was both a good and bad thing, because it gave her better access to him, but they were facing each other, in his bed, together. Every part of Martha felt alive, and she was aware of things that should have made her feel afraid. that Parker wasn't wearing a shirt, that his upper body, while currently bruised and beaten, had filled out a lot more than it was the last time they'd been this close, and he'd been without a shirt. That she was also under the bed covers with him, in nothing but her underwear. Physical contact was something she tended to avoid. It was real, and kind of terrifying, and she didn't want to be afraid. Seeming to notice, Parker murmured, "Are you all right?" "I'm okay," she assured him, in spite of the clear tremor in her voice. "I can roll back over if you want." "No, I don't want that," she replied, aware that her other hand, the one that had been injured, was clutching the bedspread that remained between them. And if she were... "No, I don't want that," she replied, aware that her other hand, the one that had been injured, was clutching the bedspread that remained between them, as if she were clinging onto it for dear life. "Take your time," he assured her. "There's no rush." Martha knew that, but she didn't want to keep hesitating, getting into her own head. She shifted her body, moved in further under the covers, her fingers carefully tracing the line of his jaw, which was rather stubbled. A fascinating discovery, as was the pulse that she found next, pounding away heavily in his throat, a live wire of emotion, a definite match for hers. The way he swallowed, as if he couldn't stop his mouth from drying out, the broadness of his shoulders, the way that his skin prickled as she kept exploring, being gentle as to not aggravate his injuries, not to hurt him any more than she'd already hurt him in the past. Even though she knew he was going to be okay, it still bothered her that he'd gotten injured. "I'm sorry about what happened today," he whispered, again reading her so easily. No metaphysics needed, he just knew her better than most. "It's all right," she said. It wasn't, but she didn't want to dwell on it. Parker didn't seem ready to let it go, though. He said, "You're right. I was reckless. I saw that Olivia was in trouble, and He shook his head as if he didn't like where his mind took him. Bad places, bad memories. Today was a bad day," she reassured him. "A really bad day." He exhaled an exhausted agreement. "Yeah. You can talk to me," she offered. "About her, if you want." Parker sealed his eyes as if that would be too much, as if he couldn't get his head around doing such a thing, and in the end he said, "I don't." "Okay, then I'd like to have that cuddle." He laughed, carefully wrapping his arm around her as she nestled into him, tucking her face into the warm plane of his neck. She breathed him in, relaxed into his embrace. Even if they never got any closer, she'd be content with her lot. This was good. It made things better. Repaired some of the hurts, old and new. As bad days went, it had been really bad. In Michael Parker's arms, she'd always managed to find some solace. She'd always been safe, felt loved. Within the sanctuary of his arms, he'd always sheltered her, adored her, and now was no exception. She wasn't sure if she could handle anything more than what they had now, but she knew deep in her bones that this man wasn't anything that she needed to fear. If there was anybody she could share this peace with, it was him. She was safe right now. He would never hurt her, and understanding that saw her lost, deep in contemplation, tempted to try for even more, to try for things that she hadn't wanted in so many years. Almost at the same time as she lifted her chin from the dip of his neck, Parker's fingertips located her face, tilted her towards him. It was instinctive, something they'd done many times before, yet as her breath caught in her throat, Martha wasn't sure if she could recall it. Anticipation, desire, a delicate fear that was okay, but almost too much. His warm breath caressed her face, the proximity of his mouth made her shiver. But he waited, didn't immediately proceed. She knew why. Her heart swelled in her chest, knowing why he gave her the choice. "Yes," she urged, not wanting him to wait any longer. Parker's voice was a husky, astonished whisper. It spoke her name. Then he fused their lips, their mouths together, reclaiming her with a kiss. And it was as if all the time that had passed since their last had been rendered meaningless. It was simple, natural, but meaningful, filled with more than a kiss should be able to carry, and Martha went with it utterly, because it was him, her old love, Michael Parker. Hard to imagine how it could have been any other person to give her that moment. He meant so much to her. This meant so much to her. This personal connection, this bond. No matter what happened next, they'd always be a part of each other, because they'd loved each other when they were only learning what love was, what it meant, and how to maybe show it in a way that involved physical intimacy. They would always be each other's first loves, always. For that one brief moment, Martha got out of her own way. She didn't think, didn't allow herself to, and then slowly the kiss, a living, breathing thing, grew, an unhurried act of two people tenderly rediscovering something that felt as familiar as it did new. Martha found satisfaction in the warmth of his embrace and revelled in how their bodies moulded back together. She felt no fear, no confliction. It was simply her and it was him, together, reunited, recapturing a solace that had always been their own. Okay, so that's chapter 14. Yeah, some personal stuff, some nice personal moments there. I'm not going to talk too much about it, because I know what things that happen in the future and I don't want to spoil anything. So, yeah, yeah, that's nice. That was nice. That was a good chapter to come back to, I think. Learn a little bit more about Martha and about her, the other side of her life, and some nice reconnection, nice moment with her and Parker. Yeah, so that was chapter 14 of Art of War, Hell Hath No Fury. It felt really good reading again. I must admit, I've kind of missed it. Yeah, so that's really nice. I must admit, I was nervous. Doing this today, and I was putting it off. But I'm glad that I've done it now. I can't wait to read more, because there's things coming up that are pretty, yeah. I won't spoil anything, but thank you as always for watching. I hope you come back for the next part of Art of War, Hell Hath No Fury. See you soon. I hope you have a very good day.